The wind off the Montana plains had a way of carrying loneliness with it. It swept through the canyons and over the sagebrush, sighing through the rafters of the old Anderson ranch like it knew the secrets of the man who lived there. Cole Anderson was a name folks in Willow Creek spoke with a mix of respect and pity. He was the cowboy who refused every woman in the county, not out of pride, but because his heart had turned to frost the winter his fiancée died, crossing the Yellowstone River 5 years back. Cole lived quiet. Sun up to sundown he worked his cattle, mended fences, and talked only to his horse, a gray gelding named Jasper. He had no patience for town talk or dances, no use for mail-order brides that came in on the stagecoach each spring. Folks said he'd gone half wild from grief, that he'd rather face another blizzard than another woman. But that was before she rode into town, before the wind changed. Her name was Clara Jameson. She wasn't from these parts, not with her soft Irish lilt and the way her eyes searched the land like she was trying to read its story. She came west under the promise of marriage, or at least that was what she told the station master when she stepped off the stage. Her intended husband, a man named Roy Hanley, had sent for her months ago, but when she arrived, she found his cabin burned and his grave marked by a crooked cross. No husband, no home, no plan, just a trunk full of letters and a world that suddenly felt too wide. Willow Creek didn't take kindly to strangers without purpose. The women whispered, the men watched. Clara tried to find work, cooking, cleaning, anything, but most ranchers didn't want the trouble of a woman alone. Most, except the one who refused them all. Their first meeting wasn't sweet, and it sure wasn't romantic. It happened on a cold November morning when Clara, half-starved and desperate, walked the 5 miles out to the Anderson ranch after hearing he needed a cook for the winter. She found him splitting wood behind the barn, shirt sleeves rolled up, the steam of his breath rising in the cold. He didn't look up when she called his name. "Mr. Anderson?" He set down the axe, slow and deliberate, and looked at her like a man looks at a storm rolling in. "You're trespassing, miss. I heard you needed help through the winter, cooking, cleaning. I can earn my keep." He wiped the sweat from his brow, eyes narrowing. "I don't hire women." She almost turned then, almost walked back to town and gave up right there. But something in his voice made her stay. Maybe it was the loneliness she recognized, the same one that had been gnawing at her since she buried her fiancé's letters under that burned oak. "You don't hire women," she said quietly, "or you just don't trust them." He didn't answer. The wind picked up, whistling through the trees, tugging at her shawl. "Mr. Anderson," she said, stepping closer, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You want a wife or just a winter alone?" That stopped him cold. He stared at her, not with anger, but with something raw and unfamiliar. For a long moment, neither spoke. Jasper snorted from the corral, breaking the silence. "You don't know what you're asking," he said finally. "Maybe not," she replied, "but I know what being alone does to a person. And I reckon neither of us deserves another winter like that." He turned away then, picked up the axe and split another log clean through. "Barn's got an empty stall. You can stay the night. We'll talk in the morning." It wasn't much of a welcome, but it was more than she'd gotten anywhere else. That night, Clara sat by the small stove in the corner of the kitchen, listening to the howl of the wind against the shutters. She cooked him supper, beans, salt pork, and a bit of cornbread from her own meager supplies. He ate in silence, eyes fixed on the fire. She noticed the worn edge of his wedding band, still circling his finger like a ghost he couldn't shake. After supper, he spoke without looking at her. "You should know something before you think about staying here. Every woman who's come near this place has ended up leaving. The land don't take kindly to company." "Maybe it's not the land that don't take kindly," she said softly. He didn't answer, but the faintest curve of a smile touched his lips, the first she'd seen from him. Outside, the snow began to fall, soft, silent, endless. The next morning, he let her stay. Days turned into weeks, and Clara learned how to move around the ranch like she belonged there. She fixed meals, mended his shirts, and even helped drive the cattle in the lower pasture when a storm threatened to trap them in the ravine. Cole said little, but he began to watch her in quiet moments. When she brushed the horse, when she sang to herself while stirring stew, when she stood at the window staring out at the hills. One evening, as the last light of dusk turned the sky to fire, she found him sitting by the corral, whittling a small wooden figure. "Who's that supposed to be?" she asked. He held it up. It was rough, but clearly a woman's shape. "Someone I used to know." "Your fiancé?" He nodded once. "You still love her?" He hesitated, then set the carving down beside him. I don't know if love's the right word anymore. It's like she's part of the land now, always there even when I try to forget. Clara stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Then maybe it's time to stop trying to forget. Their eyes met in the fading light, his full of ghosts, hers full of something like hope. And somewhere beyond the hills, thunder rolled. Because every story in Willow Creek starts with a storm, and this one was only just beginning. The storm came 3 days later, riding down from the north like a beast out of the mountains. By noon the sky had turned the color of iron, and by nightfall the snow was thick enough to swallow sound. The wind howled through the valley, tearing at the shutters and piling drifts higher than the fence posts. Cole and Clara worked side by side to save what they could. They brought in the horses, secured the feed shed, and stacked firewood until their fingers went numb. Jasper whinnied in protest as the blizzard pressed in, but Clara's calm voice steadied even him. Cole noticed that, how she didn't flinch, how she faced the cold like she'd been fighting her whole life. When the worst of it hit, they huddled in the small kitchen with a single lantern burning low. Snow hammered the roof, the wind moaned down the chimney, and the world beyond their window disappeared. Been years since a storm like this, Cole said quietly, pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs. Last one near took half the herd. Clara wrapped her hands around the cup for warmth. What did you do? I buried what I could find come spring. His voice was calm, but the weight of it sank into her chest. She knew loss, but the kind that left a man living on the edge of silence was something different. Storms always end, she said gently. He looked up, eyes reflecting the lantern light. Not all of them. For a while neither spoke. The fire crackled, the wind screamed, and the silence between them became something fragile, not cold but cautious. She could see the exhaustion in him, the way he carried grief like a second shadow, and still something about him drew her in, as steady as the mountains outside. That night, when the stove went out and the temperature dropped so low their breath turned to frost, Cole brought another blanket from his room and laid it over her shoulders where she slept by the fire. He stood there a long moment, watching her face soften in the dim light, her hair falling across her cheek. He'd told himself he wouldn't care again. He'd promised that love was just a kind of hunger that left a man hollow. But as he stood there listening to the wind batter the walls, something inside him cracked. It wasn't love yet, not even close, but it was the first thaw after years of winter. By morning the world was buried under white. The ranch had survived, but just barely. Fence lines were down, cattle scattered, and the supply shed roof had caved under the weight of the snow. Clara worked without complaint, hauling buckets of water, patching what she could, her face red from the cold. Cole watched her from across the yard, her small figure against the vastness of the frozen plain, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Gratitude. By mid-afternoon, the sound of hooves broke through the quiet. 2 riders appeared through the haze, bundled in furs and carrying rifles. When they reached the porch, Cole's expression hardened. "Sheriff," he said flatly, "what brings you out here?" The older man dismounted, his coat crusted with ice. "Storm caught us halfway to Deadwood. Figured we'd wait it out at your place if you don't mind." Cole nodded once. "You're welcome by the fire." The other rider pulled back her hood, revealing a sharp-eyed woman with a scar down her cheek. Clara froze when she saw her. Something about the woman's stare made the air feel heavier. "This is Deputy Marlene Shaw," the sheriff said. "She's been tracking an outlaw last seen near Willow Creek." Cole's jaw tightened. "An outlaw?" The sheriff nodded. "Name's Tom Hanley." The name hit Clara like a slap. Her heart stuttered. "Hanley?" she whispered. "Did you say Tom Hanley?" The sheriff looked at her curiously. "You know him?" She swallowed, throat dry. "He was supposed to be my husband." Cole's eyes flicked toward her, confusion and something darker beneath. The sheriff frowned. "Then you best sit, miss. We got questions." Inside the cabin, the storm howled louder, like it knew secrets were about to be dragged into the light. The sheriff spread a map on the table.
"Hanley robbed a stage outside Bozeman last month.
Killed 2 guards. Rumor says he's hiding in these hills. If that's true, he's a dead man walking." Clara stared at the map, her hands trembling. "He's dead. I was told his cabin burned." "It did," Marlene said, her voice cold. "But he wasn't in it." Cole stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "You saying this woman was part of it?" The sheriff raised a hand. "No one's saying that yet. But folks talk. They say a woman came looking for Hanley after the robbery. Fits her description." Clara's face flushed with fear and anger. I came because I was promised a home, not a grave. The sheriff studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. We'll camp out here till morning. Storm should clear by then. When they left to settle their horses in the barn, Cole stood by the window, staring into the white blur outside. You never told me your fiancé's name, he said quietly. Because I thought he was gone, she whispered. And if he isn't? She turned toward him, her eyes fierce despite the tears gathering there. Then I want to know why he let me believe he was. He said nothing. Outside, the wind began to fade, replaced by the eerie stillness that follows a storm. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by the dying embers of the fire, clutching one of Hanley's old letters. It was worn and creased, the words blurred by her tears. My dearest Clara, when the snow melts, we'll begin again. The West is hard, but I'll make it gentle for you. She wondered if those words had ever been true. In the shadows of the room, Cole stirred. You'll get no peace from ghosts, he murmured. You ever tried? He opened his eyes, the glow of the coals catching the edge of his face. Every day. She looked at him, and in that moment something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. Two people haunted by promises the wind had carried away. The sheriff and his deputy left before dawn, leaving behind only boot prints and questions. As the sun rose over the frozen hills, Clara watched the light crawl across the land. The storm was over, but peace felt further away than ever. Cole came up beside her, his voice low. You should have told me. Would you have let me stay if I had? He didn't answer, and that silence told her everything. She turned to face him, her breath clouding in the cold air. You think I'm trouble, Cole Anderson? He met her gaze, steady and unreadable. I think you're the kind of trouble a man spends his life trying not to want. And for the first time since the snow began to fall, she smiled. Small, sad, and full of something dangerous. Because out there on the edge of the world, love didn't come softly. It came like a storm, and sometimes it never left. The thaw came slow that year. Snow still clung to the hillsides in long white scars, and the river groaned under a shell of ice. Cole Anderson's ranch lay quiet, half broken from winter, but it was alive, and so was something between him and Clara that neither of them could name. They worked side by side every morning, repairing what the storm had torn apart: fence posts, feed troughs, the roof of the barn. Clara took to the land like she was born to it, her hands raw and chapped, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied back with a strip of cloth. She was no delicate Eastern lady now. The West had carved its mark into her, same as it had done to him. Sometimes, when the sun sank behind the mountains and the air smelled of thawing earth, Cole would catch himself watching her, the way her eyes softened at the sight of the horses, the way she hummed under her breath when she thought he couldn't hear. He told himself it was simple gratitude, nothing more. But at night, when the fire burned low and the walls felt too quiet, he wasn't sure he believed that anymore. Life on the frontier didn't give much time for thinking, though. The spring roundup came early, and with it came news, the kind that could crack open a man's peace like lightning splitting a pine. Cole heard it first in town, at the mercantile while he was trading for seed. Heard Hanley's alive, the storekeeper said, lowering his voice. Robbed a freight wagon near Miles City 2 weeks back. Left 3 men dead. Cole froze. His hand tightened on the sack of oats until the paper tore. You sure? He asked quietly. Sure as a coyote's howl. Sheriff's raising a posse. Says Hanley's headed this way. Maybe even hiding out in Willow Creek again. Cole left the store without another word. By the time he reached the ranch, dusk had already fallen, painting the sky in red and gold. Clara was by the corral brushing Jasper. She looked up, smiling, until she saw his face. What happened? You're Hanley, he said, the words hard in his throat. He's alive, and he's close. The brush slipped from her hand, landing in the dirt. For a long time she didn't speak. The wind carried the faint cry of a hawk somewhere over the ridge. Alive? She whispered. How can that be? I don't know, but if he's running, the law won't be far behind. Her face went pale. Then they'll think I knew. They'll come for me, won't they? Cole stepped closer, his voice softer now. I won't let that happen. Her eyes lifted to his, searching. Why would you care? He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, really looked, and saw in her the same kind of brokenness that lived inside him. The kind that didn't ask for saving, only for someone to stay. Because you've got nowhere else to go, he said finally, and because maybe I don't either. That night the moon rose cold and white over the hills. Clara sat by the window staring out into the dark, her thoughts tangled with old ghosts. Tom Hanley, the man who had written her letters full of dreams, who had promised her a home, who had vanished and left her chasing a grave that wasn't his. She remembered his handwriting, bold and slanted, full of charm and lies. She remembered how, when she was still back east, his letters had smelled faintly of smoke and pine, how his words had painted the West as a place of hope, and now all she could see was blood on the snow. Cole stood by the hearth, whittling quietly, his knife glinting in the firelight. She could feel his eyes on her even when she didn't look. "You think he'll come here?" she asked. "If he's smart, he'll stay far away. If he's desperate—" Cole paused, the knife stilling in his hand. "Then he'll come to the one person who still believes he's worth something." Her breath caught. "I don't believe in him anymore." "Don't matter what you believe," Cole said. "Men like him, they believe for both of you." Silence settled heavy between them. The next morning, before the sun had even broken over the horizon, Jasper started to spook. Clara was the first to hear it. The low rumble of hooves from the east, too many to be wild horses. She ran to the porch, heart pounding. In the distance, 5 riders were cutting across the valley, their coats flapping in the wind. Cole came out behind her, rifle in hand. "You expecting company?" she asked, voice tight. "No," he said, sighting down the barrel. "But looks like they're expecting me." As the riders drew near, he recognized the lead man, Sheriff Harris, the same one who'd come during the storm. "Morning, Anderson," the sheriff called as he reined in his horse. "We need a word." Cole lowered the rifle, though his grip didn't ease. "This about Hanley?" The sheriff nodded grimly. "We tracked him through the foothills, lost his trail near here. Found a dead horse with his saddle still on. He's hurt bad, maybe worse. You seen anything?" Cole shook his head. "Not a thing." The sheriff's eyes slid to Clara, standing behind him on the porch. "You sure about that, miss?" Her voice trembled, but she stood tall. "I haven't seen him since before I came here." Marlene, the deputy, stepped forward, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Funny thing, we found something near that dead horse. A torn letter addressed to my dearest Clara, same handwriting as the ones you gave the sheriff last time." Clara's breath hitched. "That doesn't mean—" "It means he's close," Cole cut in, his tone firm. "And you'd best be ready if he finds her first." The sheriff nodded slowly. "We'll set up camp near the ridge. If he comes this way, we'll smoke him out." When the riders left, the silence that followed was thick as fog. Clara turned to Cole, tears bright in her eyes. "They think I'm hiding him." He set the rifle aside and looked at her, not with anger, but with something deeper. "Are you?" She shook her head violently. "No. God, no." He believed her. He wanted to. But somewhere deep down the thought lingered. What if love, even the broken kind, still had its pull? That night, sleep wouldn't come. Cole sat by the fire, eyes on the door, rifle leaning against the wall. Clara lay awake in the next room, her heart pounding with every gust of wind. Sometime near midnight, the latch creaked. Cole was on his feet in a heartbeat, rifle raised. The door swung open, and there he was, Tom Hanley. His face was gaunt, his coat torn, blood crusted on his sleeve. His eyes darted to Clara, and the corner of his mouth twisted into something that might have once been a smile. "Told you I'd come back for you," he rasped. Clara froze. Cole stepped forward, blocking her path. "You're not welcome here," Cole said, voice low and steady. Hanley's eyes burned. "You think you can keep her from me, Cowboy?" He sneered. "She's mine. Always was." "Not anymore," Cole said. The outlaw's gaze flicked between them, and something dark and bitter twisted his face. "So that's how it is," he hissed. "You took what's mine." He raised his gun, and outside the coyotes began to howl. The gun went off before the wind even had time to carry the echo. The sound cracked through the cabin like thunder. Cole moved first, faster than thought, faster than fear, shoving Clara behind the stove just as the bullet tore through the window and buried itself in the wall. Hanley stood framed in the doorway, one shoulder pressed against the jamb, his face pale and drawn. Blood seeped through his coat, spreading down his sleeve in slow, ugly rivers. He was hurt bad, but there was still a wild fire in his eyes, that kind of desperate madness that comes when a man's got nothing left but anger. "Put the gun down, Hanley," Cole said, his rifle leveled steady. "You're bleeding out. You'll be dead before dawn if you don't." "Don't you tell me what I'll be?" Hanley spat, his voice rough and broken. "You think I came all this way to die in the cold? I came for her." Clara rose slowly from behind the stove, her voice trembling. "Tom, what happened to you?" He laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that made the hair on Cole's neck stand up. "What happened? I built this life for you, Clara. I bled for it. But when the world turned, you gave it to him." "I didn't give anything to anyone," she said, her eyes glistening. "I thought you were dead." Hanley's hand shook as he aimed the pistol again. "And now you wish I was." Cole stepped forward, calm, voice low. "You're out of bullets, Hanley. I heard the click after you fired. Drop it, and maybe the sheriff finds you alive come morning." Hanley hesitated, his gaze flicking to the rifle in Cole's hands. The weight of his pain showed then. Not just in his eyes, but in the tremor that ran through him, the exhaustion pulling at his shoulders. "You think you're some kind of savior," Hanley said, voice cracking. "You think she wants you? She's mine." Cole didn't flinch. "You had your chance." The outlaw's face twisted. He raised the gun again, even empty, and charged. The two men collided hard, the sound of it filling the small cabin. The gun clattered to the floor, sliding under the table. Cole's rifle went with it. They grappled, fists and fury, crashing against the walls. Clara screamed his name, but the fight had already turned animal. Two men, two ghosts locked in something older than either of them could name. Cole landed a heavy blow, sending Hanley staggering. But Hanley came back wild, slamming into him with the strength of a man who's got nothing to lose. They fell against the door, burst through it, and tumbled out into the snow. The night was silent but for the struggle, the sound of boots grinding ice, breath in sharp gasps, the dull thud of fists. Clara grabbed the lantern from the table and ran after them, the light flickering wildly across the white. "Stop," she cried. "Both of you." But neither heard. Hanley swung again, missing by an inch. Cole ducked, drove his shoulder into the outlaw's ribs, and sent him sprawling into the snow. In that moment, Hanley's strength failed him. He coughed a deep, wet sound and fell back, clutching his side. When he pulled his hand away, it was slick with blood. Cole stood over him, chest heaving, breath steaming in the cold. "It's over," he said quietly. Hanley laughed again, weak but mean. "It ain't over till she says it is." He turned his gaze to Clara, eyes pleading now. "Tell him, Clara. Tell him you still love me." The words hung in the air, heavy as the storm clouds overhead. Clara's heart ached at the sight of him, the man she'd once believed in, now broken beyond repair. "I did love you," she said softly, "but not like this. Not anymore." Hanley's breath came ragged. "So that's it then?" "That's it." For a moment, the only sound was the wind. Then his body went still. Cole knelt beside him, feeling for a pulse that wasn't there. Clara fell to her knees in the snow, tears freezing on her cheeks. "He could have run," she whispered. "He could have lived." "He already gave up living long before tonight," Cole said, voice quiet, heavy with something that wasn't victory. By dawn, the sheriff's posse arrived. The sky was gray, the snow crusted with ice, and the blood, what was left of it, looked like rust against the white. The sheriff climbed down from his horse, his face grave. "Heard the shot from half a mile out," he said. "Figured it was you." Cole nodded once. "He came here hurt, pulled a gun." The sheriff looked past him at Clara, who stood silent, her shawl drawn tight. "You all right, miss?" She nodded faintly, though her eyes said otherwise. The deputy, Marlene Shaw, stepped forward, her voice clipped. "You sure he's dead?" "Sure enough," Cole said. They buried Hanley at the edge of the valley where the snow met the frozen earth. Clara said no words, no prayers, only laid one of his letters on the grave. The ink faded and the paper soft from her hands. When it was done, the sheriff tipped his hat and rode out, leaving the two of them standing alone in the quiet. For a long while they didn't speak. The only sound was the creak of the windmill turning slow in the breeze. "You did what you had to," she said finally. "No," Cole replied. "I did what a man does when there's no good choice left." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the weariness behind his steady eyes. The guilt, the years of silence that had already carved too deep. "He would have killed you," she whispered. "Maybe, but killing a man, even when you have to, don't make it right." He turned and walked back toward the cabin. She followed a moment later, her boots crunching softly in the snow. Inside, the fire had gone out. She crouched to relight it, her hands trembling. Cole set his rifle against the wall, staring into the empty space where the fight had started. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "What happens now?" He looked at her, not with hardness, but with a kind of quiet surrender. "Spring's coming. Land needs tending. Life don't stop just 'cause a storm passed through." She nodded, though her eyes were still wet. "And us?" He hesitated, then said softly, "That depends on whether you still mean what you said the night you came here." She frowned. "What did I say?" "You asked if I wanted a wife or just a winter alone." For the first time since the snow fell, she smiled, and faint, tired, but real, maybe, she said. "You don't have to choose anymore." He watched her for a long moment, the flicker of firelight catching in her hair. Outside, the valley lay still under the pale morning sun, quiet but not empty. The worst of the storm had passed. But the kind that lived inside a man's heart, that would take longer to clear. And for the first time in 5 long years, Cole Anderson let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, spring would come after all. Spring came slow and reluctant, like a wounded animal testing the air. Snowmelt turned the dirt roads to rivers, and the valley began to breathe again, soft with new grass and the distant call of meadowlarks. For the first time in years, the ranch felt alive. Yet the peace that followed Hanley's death was uneasy, fragile as a spider's thread. Cole and Clara went about their days like nothing had changed, but everything had. There were mornings when the silence between them felt thick enough to choke on, and nights when the ghost of Hanley's voice still whispered through the cracks in the walls. Grief didn't leave easy, not in the West. It lingered like smoke curling around every word left unspoken. Still, they worked. The spring calves needed branding. The fences needed mending, and the soil had to be broken for planting. Cole was a man who healed through labor. He put his pain in his hands and worked it until it dulled. Clara followed his lead, though her healing came slower. She'd rise before dawn to make coffee and biscuits, hum to herself as the fire caught. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she'd take one of Hanley's old letters from the drawer, read a few lines, then quietly burn it in the stove. One morning, Cole found her doing just that. The letter curled in the flame, its edges glowing gold before turning black. "You don't have to keep doing that," he said gently. She didn't turn to look at him. "Yes, I do. If I don't burn them, they'll keep talking to me." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You think burning paper stops ghosts?" Her voice softened. "No, but it helps me remember that they're gone." He nodded, not pressing further. Some wounds didn't need words. Later that day, they rode out to the north pasture to check the cattle. The land stretched wide and clean under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Jasper's hooves sank into the thawing earth, and the smell of spring, wild sage and mud mow, filled the air. It should have been a quiet ride, but the land had a way of stirring memories. Clara kept glancing toward the ridge where Hanley was buried, a small mound marked by a single wooden cross. "You ever wonder if we did the right thing?" she asked suddenly. Cole turned his head, squinting against the sun. "About what?" "Letting him die there, leaving him alone." He thought for a long moment before answering. "A man writes his own ending by the choices he makes. You can't rewrite it for him." "Maybe not," she said softly. "But sometimes I think the West buries more than it forgives." He looked out at the horizon, his jaw tight. That's the truth of it. They rode in silence for a while. When they reached the far fence line, Cole dismounted to repair a break where the wire had snapped. Clara watched him work, the steady rhythm of his hands, the quiet patience that lived in every movement. She thought of the man he'd been when she first met him. Closed off, cold as the winter ground, and now standing there in the sun he looked almost like someone new. "You never told me what you lost," she said after a while. He paused, glancing up. "I told you enough." "No," she said gently. "You told me what happened, not what it took from you." He went back to his work, twisting the wire. "Her name was Nora," he said finally. "She was a school teacher from Kansas. We were set to be married come spring. She drowned crossing the Yellowstone after a thaw. River took her horse, took her too." Clara swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. Wasn't your fault," he said quietly. "But after that I figured love's a thing you can't trust. Like the weather, and too easy to change, too hard to survive. And now?" she asked. He met her gaze, something raw in his eyes. "Now I ain't sure. You came here when I wasn't looking for saving, and somehow you did it anyway." She smiled, small, uncertain. "You make it sound like I'm some kind of miracle. Maybe you are." She looked away then because his voice carried too much truth. And truth in the West was more dangerous than a gun. That evening they returned to find a rider waiting at the gate. The man was dressed in black, his hat pulled low. He carried no badge, but something in his stance told Cole this wasn't a friendly visit. "You Anderson?" the man called out. "Depends who's asking. Name's Dillon, U.S. Marshal." He pulled a folded paper from his coat and handed it over. "Warrant out of Montana Territory. Says you're in possession of property belonging to Thomas Hanley. Gold from the Bozeman robbery." Cole's face darkened. "That's a lie." "Maybe," Dillon said coolly. "But I've got orders to search your place." Clara's breath caught. "We don't have anything that belonged to him." The marshal's eyes flicked to her. "Then you got nothing to hide." Cole's jaw tightened, but he stepped aside. "Search all you want." The marshal did, through the barn, the cellar, the loft, until at last he came back holding a small canvas pouch. He emptied it on the table and a spill of gold coins clattered against the wood. Cole froze. "Where the hell did that come from?" The marshal shrugged. "Buried under your feed shed. Looks like the kind of thing men kill over." Clara stared at the coins, her face pale. "I swear I've never seen that before." The marshal pocketed the pouch. "Maybe you haven't, maybe you did. Either way, one of you's got explaining to do. You'll both ride with me to Bozeman till this gets sorted." "You're out of your mind," Cole snapped. "I didn't steal—" "Save it," Dillon cut in. "You can tell it to the judge." He turned to leave, but Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Wait. If that gold was his, then he must have hidden it here before he came for me. He was already dying. Maybe he wanted me to find it." The marshal's eyes narrowed. "Then that makes you an accomplice." Cole stepped between them. "She's got nothing to do with this. I'll go." "Let her be." "You're both coming," Dillon said flatly. "Sun up tomorrow." And just like that, the fragile peace they'd built began to crack. After the marshal left, Clara sat by the fire, her face buried in her hands. "He's not done with us," she whispered. "Even dead, he's not done." Cole looked into the flames, the light flickering across his tired face. "The dead got no power unless the living give it to them." She looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes. "And what if the living don't get a choice?" He didn't answer. He just stared out the window, where the last of the daylight bled over the hills, the same hills that had buried their past and now threatened to bury their future. For a long time, neither spoke. The West was quiet that night, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a lone coyote cried, the sound stretching long and mournful through the dark. The morning came gray and heavy, clouds hanging low over the valley like the sky itself was waiting to see how it would end. The wind had lost its bite, but not its warning. Cole Anderson saddled Jasper in silence while Clara packed what little she had. A shawl, a tin cup, a single folded letter she couldn't bring herself to burn. The U.S. Marshal, Dillon, rode up before dawn's light had fully broken, his black horse steaming in the cold air. He looked like a man made of iron and dust, the kind that never blinked when it came to duty. "We ride to Bozeman," he said simply. "It's a 2-day trip. Best not keep the judge waiting." Cole glanced at Clara, his jaw tight. "She's not coming." "I told you last night she didn't know a damn thing." Dillon's hand rested easy on his holster. "And I told you, both of you ride." "You can argue it all you want in front of the law." Clara's voice broke through, quiet but firm. "Then we ride together." Cole turned to her, frustration flashing in his eyes. "You don't need to do this." She met his gaze with a steadiness he hadn't seen before. "I'm done running from what haunts me." And so they rode. The trail cut through the high plains where the land rolled endless and the silence pressed close. The air smelled of thawing pine and wet earth. Every hoofbeat seemed to echo with the weight of what neither dared to say. By the second day, the mountains had begun to rise ahead, sharp and blue against the sky. The marshal rode a few yards ahead, scanning the horizon. Cole and Clara followed side by side. She rode with her shawl pulled tight, the wind tugging at her hair. "You think they'll hang me?" she asked after a long silence. He looked at her sharply. "No, and they won't hang me either. I'll tell them the truth. And if the truth ain't enough, then I'll make it enough." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that looked borrowed from another life. "You can't fight every storm, Cole." "I can try," he said. That night they made camp beside a river still swollen with meltwater. The marshal tied off the horses, lit a small fire, and sat apart, his face unreadable in the flickering glow. Clara sat by the flames, staring into them like they might offer an answer. "Tell me something," she said softly. "If this all goes wrong, what will you do after?" Cole poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the dark. "Same thing I've always done. Keep the ranch alive. Feed the stock. Mend what's broken." She looked at him, her eyes shining in the firelight. "And if I can't come back?" He swallowed hard. "Then the ranch won't mean much anymore." They didn't speak again that night. Morning came with the sound of thunder, not from the sky, but from hooves. Before the sun had even cleared the ridge, a small band of riders appeared across the plain, kicking up dust as they came hard and fast. The marshal jumped to his feet, hand on his revolver. "Get down," he barked. Cole saw the faces then. Rough men, guns drawn, eyes cold. He recognized one, Jake McCall, Hanley's old partner. "Looks like your outlaw left unfinished business," the marshal growled. The riders fanned out, forming a half circle. McCall called out, "We ain't here for you, lawman. We came for what Hanley stole, and the ones who might have kept it." His eyes landed on Clara. "She don't got it," Cole shouted. McCall laughed, sharp and ugly. "Then she knows where it is." Before anyone could speak again, the first shot rang out. The marshal fired back, ducking behind a fallen log. The world exploded into chaos. Gunfire, smoke, shouting. The wild terror of horses rearing against the wind. Cole pulled Clara down behind the wagon. "Stay low." Cole, he was already moving, rifle in hand, his eyes steady. He fired once, hitting one of the riders square in the chest. Another bullet tore through his sleeve, grazing his arm, but he didn't stop. The marshal shouted something, then went down hard, clutching his side. "Marshal," Cole called, but there was no answer. It was just him now. Him, Clara, and the outlaws closing in. "Give us the girl," McCall called out. "You don't, and we burn the whole valley after we're done with you." Cole stepped out from behind cover, blood dripping from his arm, rifle leveled. "You're not taking her," McCall sneered. "You gonna stop me, cowboy?" "I already stopped one man who thought she was his to take." McCall's smirk faltered. "Then you'll die for her?" "No," Cole said quietly. "I'll live for her," he fired. The shot hit true. McCall toppled from his horse, the others scattering in confusion. A few more wild shots cracked through the air, but the fight broke fast after that. The survivors turned and fled into the hills, leaving the plain littered with smoke and silence. Cole lowered the rifle slowly. His chest heaved, his arm bled freely, but he was still standing. Clara ran to him, falling to her knees beside him in the dirt. "You're hit," she said, her hands shaking as she tore a strip from her shawl to bind the wound. "Not bad," he managed. "I've had worse," her eyes filled with tears. "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah," he said softly. "I did." The marshal survived the night, though barely. By dawn, he was conscious enough to mutter through gritted teeth, "Guess you two ain't guilty after all." McCall's saddlebag had the rest of the gold. Hanley must have hidden it with him. He gave a weak laugh. "You're free." Those words fell like rain on dry ground. They rode back to Willow Creek 3 days later, slower this time, the world softer somehow. The valley was green again, wildflowers pushing up through the mud. When they reached the ranch, Clara dismounted and just stood there, staring at the land and the fences, the house, the hills that had once felt like a prison. "It's strange," she said quietly, "how something can feel so empty one day and like home the next." Cole looked at her, the wind tugging at his hat brim. "You thinking of leaving?" She smiled faintly. "I was before all this. But now," she looked toward the horizon, where the sun was breaking through the clouds in long gold streaks. Now I think I've been running from home all my life. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Then maybe it's time to stop running. She met his eyes, and for the first time there was no fear there. No ghosts. Only two people who'd walked through fire and somehow found each other still standing. You still want a wife? She asked softly. Or just another winter alone? He smiled, that quiet, rare smile she'd only seen once before. Depends who's asking. Same woman as before, she said. Just not as scared this time. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then I reckon it's time I stopped refusing. The wind carried across the fields, gentle now, no longer howling, more like breathing. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the land that had seen too much death, too much sorrow, and still somehow bloomed again. And there, standing on that patch of hard-earned earth, Clara Jameson and Cole Anderson found something neither of them thought they'd ever know again. Peace. Because in the end, the West didn't forgive easily, but it did reward the ones who stayed. The ones who fought, who endured, who loved anyway. And as the evening faded into gold, the old cowboy who refused every woman in the county finally took a hand in his, not out of pity or need, but because after every storm, every ghost, and every long winter, he'd finally learned what it meant to come home.